second player, press start.
Hello and welcome back from a long hiatus to Second Player Press Start. This is a podcast about video games, and as always, I'm joined by my best friend, not sitting on my couch, but sitting on the digital couch.
First time.
For the first time. Yeah, we're recording this remotely as you all know, we're under a global pandemic. And we kind of wanted to try recording a episode remotely. So hopefully this sounds okay. Darren sounds good on my end. So yeah.
Yeah, I sound good on my end too. Yeah,
so it's been a while since we've done one of these. I think we had some like life stuff happen in both of our lives and just got busy, and then this whole thing happened, and then we haven't had a chance to kind of sit down and talk about video games.
Correct.
But today we took the opportunity to play for about an hour, I think. An hour, 2 hours?
Yeah, seems about right.
And I played a little bit beforehand, and you did also. So the game that we're going to be talking about today is DC Universe Online. Not to be confused with DC Universe, which I found out is like a subscription service for all of like DC stuff.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. One's called DC Universe, and then the other's called DC Universe Online. But this is a free-to-play, what's the acronym?
M.M.O. or MMORPG, Mamorpaga.
Yeah, that one. It's developed by Dimensional Inc. Games, which I'm sure is just a company that was set up to develop this one game. And it's published by Daybreak Game Company, which handle a bunch of MMOs from EverQuest to PlanetSide and
interesting.
A bunch of them. This game came out in 2011, which seems like such a distant memory. It was initially released on the PC and PlayStation 3, which now support has been removed for that.
It's on PS4 now too.
It's on PS4, Xbox One, and even the Nintendo Switch has a version, which is kind of interesting. We both played this game on our personal computers. Darren, I believe you downloaded it from Steam.
Yeah, I got access to it through Steam, and you went through their main website on PC. And then when I had originally played this a week or two ago, it was because my friend, who's also in quarantine, wanted to be able to play with me, and he's only got consoles. So we found out he could play on his PlayStation, and I downloaded a PC, and we had some fun through that. So
it's definitely a neat trend that games are kind of going like this multi-platform direction, which I'm all for, because it now leads to, playing with friends who, they might not have a PlayStation and you might have a PC, and then you can at least kind of connect that way.
Sure.
Which is really cool. So I think I did play this game like on the PlayStation 4 back in 2013, because I think that's when it first came out on that platform. I don't even think I made it past the tutorial. I think it was just one of those things that didn't grab me right away, so I just kind of put it down. So I was surprised that this game was still even running, because it had been so long since I initially tried it. Was this kind of your first time playing this, or have you checked it out in the past?
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember. Some of it seems familiar, but it's possible that, because there's been a few other superhero MMOs, Champions Online, and there's a Marvel one, and there was, I'm trying to remember, Paragon Studios or something like that. There was like I don't know, it was another superhero MMO, and I just don't remember the name of it. But it was old school now. It goes back well before this one first launched. So I could just be conflating it because they all feel very similar.
Right. Have you played any other MMOs beyond this one?
I've played EverQuests, maybe more than one of them. Played WoW. I've played Tabula Rasa, which was a Richard Garriott game that had a short lifespan, but was actually the only MMO I ever paid a subscription to because, just something about the lore and some of the visuals and some of the story elements of it were really compelling to me.
Yeah, I think the only MMO that I've tried was WoW. I tried that not too long ago, but I jumped in at like the bottom end, the free tier.
Right.
And I played that for a few hours one night, and it was a lot of kind of fetch questy stuff.
Sure.
I'm sure from what I've heard of that game, like you kind of see the benefits once you get to kind of higher levels, but I didn't invest too much time. So this is really the only kind of second time that I've tried a MMO.
Right.
Did you want to kind of talk about the setup of the game? Kind of starts with a pretty crazy kind of intro cinematic.
If I remember correctly, I watched this like a few weeks ago now, but it was all like rendered CG stuff, right? Yeah. And I mean, they had, proper voice actors. I think it sounded like the Batman was voiced by Batman the Animated Series, Kevin Conroy. So there's that. They had, big CG battles, and they had this big fight sequence and whatnot. And yeah, that was kind of the intro.
I struggled a little bit to kind of follow the plot as far as I could tell.
That's because DC Comics.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but so there's Brainiac who is trying to conquer the world, the universe.
Yeah, some kind of like AI type Ultron character, like Ultron from Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
But I think there's some similarities there. Again, I don't know a lot of Brainiac, so if there's big DC fans out there, you can definitely correct us on Twitter or other social media or whatever. But it seems like this kind of rogue AI type character who can like mind control people and devices and stuff like that.
And then Lex Luthor from the future visits the superheroes of the present to warn them about Brainiac's plans of like conquering all kind of a thing.
Right.
Is that kind of in line of the story?
I think so. Something like that. Like I get the feeling that the combat sequence we saw at the beginning, this big battle, and they're fighting like Lex Luthor and these other villains and stuff. And it's just a way to showcase the superhero versus supervillain setup at the beginning. So they have this big battle sequence, and then there's this break in the action where you realize that the world's going to be destroyed by Brainiac. And then we go back to find out that future Lex Luthor comes back to tell present Justice League of America and villains and whatnot that this is going to happen, so they need to work together, something kind of like that.
And then Brainiac starts inhabiting civilians, or no?
Well, it's the part that there was the idea is that there's like these nanobot type things that are essentially giving humans superpowers, and that's Brainiac's technology, but it's Lex Luthor that made it happen. And the idea is that the more people in the world that have superpowers, the more people that the villains or the superheroes can like co-opt to fight off Brainiac. So it just gives a setup for this kind of open world MMO where now it at least kind of makes sense that every one of the player characters is a superhero. And there's like, millions of them across the globe, and they all have new superpowers and that kind of thing. And they're all being trained by supervillains or superheroes across the world. So it's just like a setup for that kind of MMO setting.
So once that kind of finishes, you're then, I guess you're one of these civilians that turns into a superhero, and you're presented with kind of a create your own character kind of thing. which actually I thought was pretty well done.
Yeah, I agree. That was one of the more, like, how can I say it? Like eyes on screen focused parts of the game so far for me. Like I spent more focused attention on character generation than I did once I got into the game, because I was running it, even though I'm on my PC, I was running it on a controller, just like a Xbox controller. And it gave me, like, I had more constant engagement in character creation than I did in the game. Because I felt like in the game I could sit back and just kind of run around and look at the world and punch things. But in character creation, I was like, oh, like, look how I can change the color of the costume, and look how I can mess with my powers. And it just, there was so much going on there that I just felt, I don't know, maybe it was the time of day, or maybe it was that I hadn't played superhero or done superhero much of anything in a long time. But I just found that really engaging to just dig into like a really in-depth character generator.
Yeah, I mean, you could kind of customize all the little colors, and yeah, I thought it was pretty well done. So why don't you describe your character that you ended up creating?
Sure. So there's a few things that are kind of global in the game in terms of there's kind of roles and types of superhero abilities. So because it's the DC universe, and I guess this would happen in any superhero game, but you have to have your like superpower Superman type character. So flying has to be a way to traverse. But then if you have flying as a way to traverse, if not everybody flies, you have to have super speed as a thing, and you have to have being able to climb buildings and stuff, just so that there's some sort of semblance of balance between character types. You also have this global aspect of character roles or types of power. So you have things like, magic, or you have science, or you have technology, like say a Batman type character that might have some sort of gadgets or weaponry or things like that, versus somebody that shoots blasts out of their hands or their eyes or something like that. So you kind of pick these different categories, and that sets you up for the types of abilities and skills, powers, and actions you can do in the game. But then you also get to do a lot of customization in terms of the look of your character. And I mean, it's pretty standard on that side of it. I remember talking about gender in games, one of the topics we went through, and how games like the new Cyberpunk and stuff were kind of letting you play in that space with a lot more inclusivity and variability. Whereas this, going back to 2011 character generation, you have male, female body types, and both are very superhero oriented. So the woman's body figure is, very curvy, very like prototypical, beautiful stereotype, as well as the male body type, similar. You have a little bit of, you can choose like a range of large to small bodies, but all they do is kind of really shrink the character model.
True, yeah.
Or make the character model bigger. And then there's a little bit of a range from like, how did they define it? It wasn't small to large, but it was like, how muscular or how curvy do you want to be? So if you want to be like huge chested, and that's man or woman huge chested, or like slimmer, kind of more agile, skinnier type. And that was kind of the range in the body types.
It definitely it actually brought me back to when I used to, we were pretty heavy into comic books in kind of the mid 90s to late 90s.
For sure.
And a lot of those, like a lot of the art around that time was very much in this vein of where, the women kind of look like supermodels. And the men are just
not fashion supermodels though. Like
no, more like Playboy kind of centerfolds, I guess.
Right.
And the men are just kind of beefcakes in a sense, right?
For sure. Yeah. And it's interesting because when we did talk about gender in games and what those ranges look like, and kind of the difference between feminine features and masculine features and stuff like this. A lot of my engagement in the character generation was in just the sheer amount of things I could do with facial features and eyes and costumes and hair and colors and all this types of stuff, as well as the superpowers that I mentioned earlier. But it was just for, as far as the body types go, I couldn't exactly do a thing that I had imagined or that I wanted, or even if I wanted to build, quote unquote, my character based on me, I probably couldn't find a body type that looked like me in any capacity. There's just not that range in there.
Yeah, I actually did start off trying to build someone that kind of resembled me.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because when you have the lore set up from the very beginning that normal people are being turned into superheroes, you'd think maybe there would be an option there just to have your superhero look like a normal person, but that wasn't really the case.
No. Yeah, I think I ended up, once I kind of realized that I couldn't build a character that kind of looked like me, I kind of just went in the opposite direction and built kind of a gothy looking, super womany kind of character.
Right. Yeah, and I ended up with, because I first started with some of the superpower ability type things, and there was one in there that was nature, and it kind of sounded like poison ivy. So I was like, oh, that's cool. So I went down that track. But then when it got to some other choices, it turned out that I also had a bow and arrow, which didn't really fit with that at all. It was kind of really weird. But it was okay because it gave me an opportunity to try something that I hadn't seen before. So I had these weird like vine and poison abilities, and then I also shot a bow and arrow and could climb walls. So nice. Yeah, it was interesting because I didn't really have a concept going in. I just, every time I had a new choice to make, I just picked something and that kind of gave me an idea for the next thing. And yeah, even my superhero costume was like, I had a butterfly symbol, and I was like, well, I guess kind of because my character had nature powers, maybe sort of that worked, but who knows?
Yeah, I just kind of leaned into, since there were a lot of sexy options, I just went, okay, let's just make a sexy looking character. So
right.
Yeah, that's what I kind of leaned into.
Yeah, there was going back to some of the skin type, body type options. One of the things that I was able to do was find like a skin type that was like green with like vine type things. It wasn't super like realistic or anything. It looked almost more like tattoos than it did like vines. But I guess that goes back to the character models that were there, almost 10 years ago now. So
right.
But my character didn't look bad in terms of the number of polygons or whatever. I thought it was a decent model for the era, and I feel like it's probably been, going back to 2011, it's probably been updated since then, is my feeling, just looking at some of the character models.
Yeah, I'm sure they've probably added some options over time. And yeah, even running around the city, I thought maybe I would run into the issue of like, oh, that character looks exactly like me, but
right.
For the brief time that I played, I didn't run into any doppelgangers, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, the only thing that I saw was that I feel like you and I and my friend that I had played with earlier as well, we had spent a fair amount of time building a character that we were excited about. And all three of us, you, me, and my friend, all have superhero comics and stuff in our past, right?
Yeah.
So to dive into this, 5-10 years after we kind of got out of that, or even 20 years, right? Depending on how much you've been steeped in that over the years. I still buy comics from time to time these days. A lot of the comics that I read are generally not superhero, unless they're from, how can I say it? They're not standard stereotype superhero. They might involve heroes or characters with superpowers, but generally a little more nuanced in terms of focusing on drama over like pulp stuff. But That aside, the fact that the three of us got to kind of develop a character coming from a past, in some capacity, a past of superheroes in our lives, I feel like we spent more time on it than maybe the average person might in terms of character generation. That's just kind of a gut feeling, because I did see characters in the game who had the default hair, the default costume, and so on, and hadn't really people that didn't really design a character as much as they just picked a body type and then started the game as fast as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely enjoyed that character creation process. Obviously, I wish there could have been, more options to kind of tailor a character that I would really want to play as. But
sure,
even with the options that they had, it was varied enough,
right?
That it was definitely entertaining for a while. Then beyond that kind of character creation, you're then brought onto a spaceship, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of a tutorial mission, I guess.
Right.
And this is before it kind of drops you into kind of the open world where you see a bunch of other people running around. But this was kind of my first taste of the game. And it's a lot of... I was playing with the keyboard and mouse, so it was a lot of clicking the mouse button over and over again.
Right.
Which you had mentioned that you plugged in a controller and felt that it was more enjoyable playing that way.
Yeah, it's a third-person beat 'em up, effectively, though it doesn't feel like a beat 'em up. I like playing those kind of... I don't know if I'd call it isometric, but just whether it's a 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up type thing, like going back to Final Fight or like Double Dragon or things like that. Those games, I've enjoyed those games going back to playing them in arcade, like X-Men games and stuff like that way back when. And there's something just satisfying about kind of button mashing and doing combos and that kind of thing as like attacks and stuff. And I've played games that kind of emulate that in 3D space and do kind of top-down or over-the-shoulder third-person kind of view. And this took that view, but the combat and the action didn't feel... I don't know. It just felt like one step removed. Like when you punched things, it didn't really react properly and you didn't feel like you had any weight behind anything you were doing, if that makes sense. It's like when you talk about an FPS and you talk about how gunplay is bad or good. It's like it just has a feel to it. And this just didn't feel super engaging in the combat, which, as we'll probably talk about soon enough, combat seems to be pretty much all you do in the game.
Yeah, I like on that tutorial mission... you're fighting along Superman, and that's kind of a novel thing, which is kind of cool.
For sure.
So I'm kind of clicking away, and you have some special abilities that are kind of attached to like a cooldown system. So every once in a while, you can kind of fire off a little special ability, which in my case, I had like these fire abilities. So my character could shoot like fireballs, and she had this cool like ground pound kind of thing that did a lot of damage, which was kind of neat. And I was able to bind those attacks to my mouse. So really, it got to a point kind of, I would say maybe 10 minutes into this tutorial mission where my finger was just kind of constantly mashing the click button and then the two buttons on the side. And I actually, there was a point in that mission where I racked up, I think it was like 200 hits consecutively. And literally I was just standing in the same place, mashing these three buttons kind of at the same time. Because there's no penalty for mashing on one of your special attacks and it's not available.
Right.
So if I just mashed these three buttons, at least one of the three would register and do some form of attack.
Sure.
So yeah, at that point of kind of playing the game, I wasn't too confident that the game would get better.
Right.
Because if you're kind of presenting like the core action of this game is kind of doing this one thing over and over again, it's like within 10 minutes, I'm not really finding that like very interesting. But
for sure. Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges that I remember in MMOs for a long time was how to make some of the core actions interesting and engaging. I remember way back when there's a Conan game that came out, and because so many things were cooldown based, even like this game is with your abilities, you just wait till the thing comes off cooldown, or like you're saying, don't wait at all, because eventually it's going to register again when you just keep hitting the same button. But Conan tried to do something interesting where your different attack directions and stuff could lead into different combos. So you'd have to mash in essentially specific orders to do different things. And that gave you a little more engagement with it. But I think about some of the games like I'm talking about, like, Double Dragon and stuff, and just the feel like that game never changes. You know what I mean? Like, you go from Final Fight, you go from street to street, you fight maybe a few different characters, maybe you pick up like a box here or there, or a lead pipe here or there, or a knife or something, right? But the game doesn't change too much from scene to scene, and yet there's still something satisfying about the way combat is done in those games. And that's why I bring that in as a direct comparison, because you're doing that over and over. That loop is the same over and over and over again. And in fact, in Final Fight, you don't even really upgrade. Like, you might have a cooldown meter for a combo or things like that, or a special ability bar or something like that. But generally speaking, you're doing the same actions over and over and over again from the start till the end of the game. There's no RPG elements, there's no leveling up, there's no skill improvements, and yet the act of that still feels engaging, because it feels like the action feels good. It looks good on the screen, and it feels like you're doing something awesome. And here it just didn't feel that way.
Yeah, to me, it felt like, the only other MMO I have to compare to is WoW, and even my time on that is pretty limited.
Right.
But in WoW, the combat resulted to kind of clicking on characters like over and over again. So this almost felt like they kind of shoehorned this combat into maybe an engine or something that was kind of designed to do maybe more of that style of game. And then just kind of added animations to that. Right. Versus, actually building, like there's lots of examples of third-person action games with combat, right? Of course. Yeah. Why not have kind of some of those gameplay mechanics and controls kind of mixed in with an MMO? I'm not too sure. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there was this aspect of MMOs has been was kind of the norm for a really long time. And that's why, like I said, Conan was like, hey, we're going to try something innovative, and we're going to make it so you don't just button mash. I mean, realistically, it's very close to what we're doing here, except you're doing things at different times and in different sequences on purpose. And that's part of where the engagement comes from. But it's still kind of the same, in comparison to some of the other ways that we've interacted with characters in combat, even over the games we've talked about on the podcast. Yeah. I don't know. It didn't really do much for me. So I was kind of hoping that, once I left that tutorial mission, that the game might kind of open up, because there's been lots of examples of games where the tutorial is just kind of teaching you the basics, and the actual game is a lot more fun. Right. So I kind of quit shortly after that tutorial mission. I actually ran into some performance stuff where all of a sudden, once I was in that open world, my frame rate kind of dropped for some reason. Right. So yeah, I figured, okay, well, this is a good time to quit, because I know we had chatted about playing this together. So I thought, okay, I'll stop here, and we'll kind of kind of visit this once we kind of get a chance to play together. Right. How was your kind of first experience playing with Kyle? He was on the PlayStation and you were on the PC. Right. Yeah. I mean, at first we got our characters in, and it took us
it's funny because we had an issue when we played this evening, you and I, on connecting to each other in game. We were already using voice chat through the internet to figure out what we were going to do and our timing and scheduling and stuff. But once we got in game, we were already talking to each other, but we couldn't group up in game because there wasn't an easy, intuitive way to do that. Like I was mashing all the buttons on my controller and it wasn't bringing anything up. And then I found out I had to actually go online to figure out how to do that, and figured it out and invited you. And I realized that when I had started before, Kyle had actually invited me to a group online. So I didn't even have to do it the first time. So it's just, it was one of those things where the only reason we were playing this game was so that we could play a game together online. Like otherwise, we may as well just be in voice and play our own separate games, right?
Right.
So the fact that wasn't something that I could easily do from a menu, where I had to like figure out what button it was either on my keyboard or on my controller, and then go through this little setup. And in fact, I couldn't even figure it out. So I had to search online for it. In fact, there was another thing later on that I tried searching for. It had to do with the rally points and moving around the map, but maybe we'll talk about that a bit later. But it's just weird to be playing a game where you expect as an MMO massively multiplayer. Like that's what the two M's are, right? That there would be it would be easy and intuitive to enter into some form of social contact in the game world, right? It's not like DC Universe Online is some coronavirus thing and there's social distancing, right? So that was strange to me. And then the other thing, like moving around the map, was a challenge too, because we would have liked to be able to teleport to different locations, or once we finally loaded it in and got into a group, to be able to like be close to each other in the same part of the city or whatever. And that took us a significant amount of time to figure out where each other was and then like meet up too. So that was also cumbersome.
Yeah. So when we first booted the game up tonight, we had a lot of issues trying to kind of get to a point where we could, let's kind of play together. We also ran into the issue, which kind of happens in a lot of games that we've played online, where if our levels aren't matched, we have obviously different quests that we can access. Right. In fact, when we finally did connect, I was actually in the middle of a quest, but I was still allowed to kind of follow you to your quest without any explanation of like, no, hey, you should finish this first. But I was kind of following you around on the quest that you were doing. Right. Which involved us running from one end of the city to the other, which probably took a good, 5 minutes, right? Of flying and running up pillars and stuff. Yeah, I'd say so. It took us a while to find each other, and then once we got to the same location, we then, because of the quest we decided to follow, ended up running in another direction to figure out how to get there and do something. Yeah, the game isn't very clear, or at least that's what I found, of like kind of directing you of where you need to go and what you need to do. There was on the HUD, there was like waypoint markers that would show a distance from your position. But when you went into the map to kind of get a feel for it, there was this kind of warp system built there that you'd expect you'd be able to move around the map faster than running across the entirety of, like, I'm not sure how big the game world is supposed to be in scale to the real world, but it did feel like with your super flight powers that, you could move faster or whatever, and I could climb walls and glide and stuff, it still felt like it took us a long time to get across the map. And in some cases that's okay, because you're interested in the world and the setting, and there's some video games that they might have a fast travel system, but like it's okay not to use it because you're engaged in what's going on in the world around you. But this didn't. I mean, we were only in Metropolis, so I can't speak to some of the other locations in the game,
but it was very samey. It was just like running through a city, and there was just there was people. There was very few vehicles. The streets were super wide, and I guess that's just part of maybe the way they had the movement mechanisms or whatever. They just needed to make things look a certain way or act a certain way, or maybe because of the amount of content, if they added too many people or cars or whatever, it just wouldn't render properly, or would take too much computing power based on their engine or something. But I'm reminded of like some of the recent Spider-Man games and stuff like that, where the city felt like alive and like living and breathing. And
this felt very much like I know this game's pretty old.
Sure.
And by 2020 standards, like it looks extremely dated. But even then, I think of games of that era that do a good job of kind of creating a real kind of lived-in city.
Right.
Even thinking of like Grand Theft Auto, right? Like the amount of life that's in that city versus what we played. It just felt very sparse. There were civilians, but they always seemed to be running in the same animation.
Right.
In kind of weird directions. And like you said, there wasn't many cars or vehicles, even though there was lots of roads.
Sure.
There was a moment where I was kind of flying in the city and it was like, yeah, this kind of feels kind of cool.
Right.
But I don't know like how much of that I would really enjoy. Like the novelty would probably wear pretty thin pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, like, there was a few moments for me too. I remember climbing, because my character couldn't fly. So the easiest way for me to traverse is take the time to climb up to a really tall building and then glide. So I found I actually just by happenstance found the tallest spire that was in the city. So by the time I got to the very top and looked around, it was kind of neat. Like I was reminiscent of doing similar things in Assassin's Creed, where you're like, you just have this bird's eye view of this entire urban area. And that was cool. And then I was able to like glide across the Bay Area in the game and stuff, and in Superman's metropolis and stuff. So that was cool. And I don't think by any means, I'm not saying all of this is like the worst game ever, but I just feel like for a game that's, the idea is that it's open world, that you can run into, thugs on the street and like, defeat them and get experience points and stuff like this, as well as there's these instances of areas all over the map where different enemies are spawning, and you can just go fight these Brainiac minions or go fight Gorilla Grodd minions or whatever, right? And I feel like for something that's supposed to be that big, I guess it just felt fake. I don't know how else to say it. Like,
right.
I see why they did it the way they did it, because it's an easy way to just set up locations on a pretty standard like blasé map and just drop spawn points in for different characters, and that essentially carries over to their quest system, right? Because every quest is go to this area, fight X of these monsters, or pick up and deliver X of these items in this one zone. And that's pretty much all we did. I mean, we got to rescue Flash from Gorilla Grodd. So there was that. That felt a little different.
Yeah, that was probably the most memorable thing that we did tonight in the game. But yeah, we did one of your quests when we finally met up, and it involved basically killing X amount of enemies, traveling to another location, and then killing another set of enemies. And then we flew to kind of my starting area where I had to kill X amount of enemies.
Right. Right.
And then I think there was like unlocking these machines that were transforming civilians into gorillas, which was kind of humorous because one of the gorillas was wearing a suit, which I thought was funny.
I think so there was that. I think the story element there was that they're turning regular citizens into gorillas.
Yeah.
And it's just funny that the only gorilla we saw that it kept saying gorilla citizen or transformed citizen or something like that was just this one in a suit. There wasn't like any other different character model. And the suit was just like an oversized suit, like a gorilla wearing a suit. It wasn't like the suit was ripped like Hulk style or anything. Yeah, it's just kind of funny.
So yeah, that was pretty samey. And then we did, we had to go rescue the Flash, which kind of brought us to this like underground lair, which, just that immediate change of setting. And I think just having you and I just on screen just kind of made it seem a bit more cooler.
Sure.
I think like it's an MMO about superheroes where everyone's a superhero.
Right.
But to me, that kind of makes it feel a little less like special to be a superhero.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that a little bit in game about the difference between, and I don't know if this is still the common MMO parlance, but the difference between an instance world and like a persistent world. And in a persistent world with this, like we've got this big city, and everywhere we go, there's stuff happening, and there's monsters spawning all the time, and you can always go back to this one area, and no matter how many of these things you kill, they're just going to come back to life, because if anybody was ever able to kill all of them, then all the other players that needed to kill those things wouldn't be able to, because they're all gone now, right? And some MMOs have handled that in different ways in terms of not only things to do with spawn rates, but how, for example, if you hunt too much of this particular animal, then you're going to whatever kind of gear you get from them is going to be higher in value because this supply and demand economy and stuff like that. But in this, it was just, they would just keep spawning, no matter how long you sat there and how many of these things that you defeated, they would just come back. So that's where things are like persistent areas on the map versus us going into this one zone. I think it was this Gorilla Grodd's hideout or lair or something like that. But we both go into this area, and the only monsters in there are an instance of them. So they only exist for our playthrough of that section. So we go in there, and what was interesting about that is James got in there first because of the location we were on the map. So you go in there first and you defeat a few of these gorillas to begin with. And when I log into or, load into that instance, I go through the first portion of that area and there's no enemies to fight because you've defeated them all. They're not respawning on us. It shows that you've actually had some interaction, some engagement with the world that's changed something. And that felt not only like you're saying like you were unique because you're the only one of 2 or 3 superheroes because we were fighting with the Flash. So that's, an NPC superhero. But not only are we one of much fewer number of superheroes, but what we're doing is actually impacting like the world, as opposed to we take out a brainiac, weird looking walking creature, and then another one respawns like 10 feet away from us in 10 seconds.
Yeah. Or, you're finishing your quest, and then as you're done, you look behind you and then there's another superhero doing the exact same thing.
Right.
Like, yeah. It just, it kind of reveals the gaminess of it, I guess.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I guess all MMOs probably have that same problem, because even when I played WoW, it was kind of, you could see the same people kind of walking along the same path, doing the same thing.
Right. And in some ways that makes the world feel more alive because there's actually real people doing real things in the world. But if you just have this respawn rate so you never run out of things or things never change, then it doesn't feel real anymore, right? So everything you've done to make it feel like a real living, breathing world is negated by the fact that that's not how the real world works, right? Like if I go to some, I don't know, urban setting and beat up some criminals that are in that area, those criminals that I beat up and sent to jail are not going to be in that area anymore, right? I mean, or like in WoW, like you're saying, right? If I go to an area and kill a bunch of spiders for some quest, then if I go back there, unless those spiders have laid a dozen eggs and then hatched over the course of another month or something, like they're not going to be there again, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you want to feel like you've had an impact and change on the world, right?
For sure, for sure.
And especially as a superhero, because that's kind of your main goal as someone trying to save the world.
Right, right.
So yeah, it sounds like we're both not too hot on this game.
It's funny because I like the superhero concept, and I feel like just looking at the sheer amount of stuff that's available. Like I said, we were just in Metropolis, and there is over half a dozen more city hubs or whatever. There's like Gotham City for the Batman side of things, and there was a few other areas I just don't even remember the names of. And then each of those areas had instance little buildings and stuff in them, just like we went into this Gorilla Grodd's location or whatever. So I feel like the sheer amount of content, if you were a DC fan and you wanted to interact with some of these villains and some of their nefarious plans, and you wanted to, like, you know, do this kind of thing, there's a lot of content here that's free, right? It doesn't cost you anything other than the download, other than the installation. And if maybe when you're playing with, maybe there's a group of 5 or something, and you go into these instant zone and you're fighting with, you know, 4 other friends or whatever, that might be really awesome. To be fair, we did have more fun in the instance zone, even though that was a very small portion of our actual play. And I have a feeling like other games have probably made those design decisions in favor of different priorities, right? There's some games out there, I remember like Guild Wars, for example, that a lot of the content was instance. So you'd always just play through and change the world in your one playthrough of it. And then you'd go to the city hub where you'd meet all the people for the socialization aspect of it, where you could interact and form parties and stuff before you go on quests that were all instances again. So I think other MMOs have taken those concepts and played with them and found ways where you could feel like you're actually making an impact on the world. It's just this one in the design decisions they made isn't doing me any favors, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
There's some interesting things in terms of the sheer amount of content and some of the character creation, but it's just not something that would hold my interest, because like I'm not a huge DC fan. I love Batman. I love some of the stuff that has happened in, you know, some of the characters in the DC universe, but by and large, DC universe isn't really that compelling to me. So there's not a lot there that I can grab onto, you know?
Yeah, I was more of if I was looking at DC stuff, it would be Vertigo.
Right.
Which was kind of more
absolutely.
of their kind of edgier stuff when I was reading comics back in the day. But yeah, I think I leaned more Marvel when I was in my comic book stage as well.
Right, for sure. Yeah. And I just feel like it's interesting too, because whenever I've thought between like back in the day of DC versus Marvel just always felt more real to me. And I remember hearing interviews with Stan Lee and stuff in some of the original creation of some of these Marvel characters, and how he wanted to put them in the real world. Like it wasn't Metropolis or Gotham, it was Manhattan, right? It was New York City, right? These were real places that the superheroes were inhabiting. And number 2, they were dealing with real life problems. It wasn't always fighting aliens. They were like, you know, it was Peter Parker and his Aunt May and his Uncle Ben that got killed, and like dealing with dating issues and like moving into adolescence and all this kind of thing. So not only were they dealing with real world issues, but it was in a real place that was represented in the comics, versus DC that wasn't really about any of that kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting that, you know, I don't know how many decades later we're looking at some of these same characters, Superman, Batman, this kind of thing, and in a game that, you know, was created, I guess 10 years ago now, but still 2011, which is a lot later than Superman or Batman were created, right? In the 30s and 40s, I guess. And we're still running into this thing where the world doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like we have an impact on it. And our characters aren't that interesting. And I just think that's an interesting, like, compare and contrast, I guess.
For sure. Yeah. I guess, I mean, it was free.
Sure.
I don't know if it would be something I would go back to. I mean, there's just so much out there that I think I could spend my time playing that would be more enjoyable. Not to say that I didn't have fun, because I always love just trying out new video games that I haven't played.
Sure.
And even games that, have been out for so long and are probably worth just kind of a visit to kind of see what they're about.
Yeah.
I guess it begs the question for me, like 2 MMOs that I've tried, I haven't really seen the appeal.
Right.
I wonder if there is an MMO out there for me. I'm not too sure.
Well, I mean, that might be something we could, knowing that MMOs are things we can play online, without being in person, right? Without being on the couch together. That might be something we check out over the next little while, and maybe do some research in that space and try a few out, see how different ones handle things differently in terms of character action versus world and persistence versus the setting and the lore and impacting the narrative versus, all these types of things we've talked about tonight.
Yeah. Definitely I would be interested in kind of expanding my gaming palette, because MMOs are pretty new to me. And like I said, I've only tried the 2. So
yeah, I will say that if you're a DC fan, if you like a lot of the characters and a lot of, that world and that setting from the superhero perspective, and you want to be able to play with a friend that maybe doesn't have the same console or the same video game system you do, then, check it out, right? Like it's free content. There's tons here. The fact that this game is still going almost 10 years later means that they're doing something right for their audience, right? There's a lot of MMOs that haven't lasted this long, right? And the fact that they're still doing something right means that maybe there's late game content, maybe there's PvP content, maybe there's something that we never even got to try that is just a lot more fun than we got to experience. And it's just a shame that, there's no way we would know that because we never got to see any of it. And the only thing that we were told is the stuff that we got to play through, or, buy this pack or whatever for this microtransaction. So we weren't exactly informed about any of what the game has to offer outside of what we got to play. So it's hard to say what's there, but I have to assume that if the game is still going on now, the servers are still running, people are still playing this, that there's content in the game that people are really enjoying and getting value out of.
Yeah, and the world was pretty populated with other players too.
Yeah, for sure.
Even in that short time that we played tonight, I got a few invites from players to kind of join their what would you call it, a guild?
There's names in the game for it. League, I think, is what they called it.
League, yeah, that's what they called it.
To go with the
so maybe
JLA.
maybe even if you're looking to kind of meet some new people that could, you could kind of explore this game with. It seems like there are people in this game that will kind of reach out to you
for sure. And I think the follow-up to that too, and this is something we started talking about, but this game being cross-platform means that one of the things that's really important for MMOs to get value out of, because of the social aspect of it, is to have critical mass, right? Like if you or I logged into this without logging in together, and we're like, hey, I just want to play a game where I can group up with some people and do some quests together, because I don't have friends that play this game, or maybe I don't have a lot of friends that maybe a lot of my pastime is solo games or something like that, right? If I was to log into this and there was nobody else playing because I could only connect to one platform, I think the value that happens when you do cross-platform is you increase the scale and the scope of how many people can play your game, and that increases the ability for your game to feel like it's active and like you've reached that critical mass. And I think that's really significant.
Yeah, I definitely hope it's a trend going forward that, games will depend less on the hardware that you own. And it's just something that we can all kind of come together and game together. Especially under these times too, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that would probably do it for DC Universe Online, unless you had anything else to say.
I do not. Nope, that's all I can think of.
Okay, yeah, so it's free. So yeah, if anything sounded remotely interesting, check it out. Hopefully our kind of commentary on the game kind of steers you in one direction or another.
Right.
Like I said at the beginning of this episode, we took a bit of a break, but hopefully we will be doing this a bit more frequently. I know I've kind of missed doing these chats with Darren because I find it a lot of fun, and yeah, I love to talk video games, and yeah, hopefully this is something we can do a bit more going forward.
Sure.
And yeah, hopefully this sounds okay, because we are doing this remotely, which we haven't done before.
Right, right. I guess we'll wait and see how the how things turn out in post and give it a listen.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So with that said, thank you so much for listening. You can check out past episodes and everything that we do on our website, which is at secondplayerpressstart.com. And yeah, I think that will wrap it up for tonight. As always, say goodnight, Darren.
Good night, James.